When you realize who you truly are, the world you once knew begins to fade. Robert Adams spoke these words with the quietness of one who had seen through the veil, not as a warning, not as a promise, but as a simple observation of what happens when consciousness recognizes itself. There is a mystery in awakening that few speak of openly, a subtle shift that changes not just how you see the world, but who remains in it with you. Some faces disappear. Some voices grow distant. And though it may feel like loss, it is something else entirely. Robert Adams understood this phenomenon deeply. He lived it. He watched as the landscape of relationship transformed around him, not through conflict or judgment, but through the natural law of resonance. When the frequency changes, the music changes. When the dreamer stirs, certain characters in the dream begin to dissolve. This is not about spiritual superiority. It is not about leaving people behind or becoming isolated in some imagined enlightenment. It is about vibration, about truth, about the impossibility of pretending once you have stopped pretending. Robert Adams would often say that awakening is not an event, it is a falling away, a shedding. And sometimes what falls away are the very people you thought you could not live without. Not because you push them away, but because the ground you once stood on together no longer exists. Robert Adams has much to teach you about this delicate, often misunderstood aspect of the spiritual path. So stay with me until the end. If this content resonates with something quiet and true inside you, consider subscribing to this channel. Leave a like so the algorithm can guide this message to those who need to hear it. And from this moment forward, gratitude. Let us begin. Robert Adams often spoke of a principle that governs all of existence, a principle older than language. Simpler than thought, he called it resonance. Everything in this universe vibrates. Every thought, every emotion, every belief system carries a frequency. And like attracts like, not through effort, not through intention, but through the natural law of what is. When you live unconsciously, when you are identified with the mind, with the story of me, you resonate with others who share that frequency. You bond over suffering, over drama, over the endless pursuit of something outside yourself. These connections feel real. They feel necessary. They form the fabric of what you call my life. But Robert Adams would remind you, they are built on a foundation of illusion. Not false in the sense of being fake, but illusory in the sense that they depend entirely on a mistaken identity. The moment awakening begins, and it is always a gradual dawn, not a sudden explosion, the resonance shifts. You no longer vibrate at the frequency of complaint, of blame, of endless seeking. You begin to rest in something quieter, something that does not need to be fed by external validation or drama. And here is where the mystery deepens. The people who were drawn to you because of your unconscious patterns begin to feel uncomfortable around you. Not because you have changed your behavior, not because you have become difficult or aloof, but because the energetic contract between you has dissolved. Robert Adams would say, you have stopped playing the game. And those who are still playing cannot understand why you will not join them. They may accuse you of being distant, cold, judgmental, but in truth, you have simply stopped resonating with the frequency of the dream they are still dreaming. There is no judgment here, no superiority. Only a quiet recognition that the path has diverged. Robert Adams lived this with profound grace. He did not chase after those who left. He did not try to convince anyone to stay. He understood that awakening is not a social event. It is a solitary blooming. And though the flower may stand alone in the field, It does not suffer its aloneness. It simply is. When you stop identifying with the character you once believed yourself to be, the entire cast of your life's drama must rearrange itself. Some characters exit stage left. Others, ones you never expected, walk quietly into the light. This is not personal. It is not a punishment. It is the natural unfolding of truth. Robert Adams would often smile and say, "Let them go. They were never yours to hold." Because in truth, no one belongs to anyone. We are all expressions of the same consciousness, temporarily playing different roles. And when your role shifts from seeker to seer, from sleeper to awakened presence, the script changes. The old relationships, built on mutual unconsciousness, cannot survive in the light of awareness. Not because awareness destroys them, but because awareness reveals they were never what you thought they were. They were mirrors, reflections of your own inner turmoil. And when the turmoil settles, the mirrors no longer serve their purpose. Robert Adams knew this deeply. He did not mourn the departures, he blessed them, because he understood that every ending is a doorway, and on the other side of that doorway is a deeper silence, a more authentic solitude, a presence that does not depend on others to validate its existence. There is a teaching Robert Adams shared that cuts through spiritual fantasy. He said, "When you become real, you can no longer participate in what is false." This sounds liberating, and it is, but it is also uncomfortable, because most human relationships are built on agreements of falsehood. Not malicious lies, but subtle pretenses. The agreement to not look too deeply. The agreement to maintain pleasant surfaces. The agreement to support each other's illusions rather than question them. Before awakening, you participate in these agreements unconsciously. You play along. You nod when expected to nod. You laugh when laughter is required. You mirror back the identity that others need you to mirror. This is not manipulation. It is survival within the dream. But when awareness dawns, something shifts. You can no longer pretend. Not because you have decided to be difficult. Not because you have adopted some spiritual persona of radical honesty. But because the mechanism of pretense has simply stopped functioning. Robert Adams described this as a kind of death, the death of the false self. And with that death comes the inability to feed false connections. You sit across from someone who wants to complain about their boss, their spouse, their circumstances, and you feel nothing. No urge to join in. No need to offer solutions. No impulse to validate their suffering. Not because you lack compassion, but because you see through the story to the storyteller. And the storyteller is not suffering. The storyteller is consciousness, temporarily identified with a narrative. This seeing changes everything. Robert Adams would watch as old friends slowly drifted away, not through argument, not through confrontation, but through a quiet, mutual recognition that the bridge between them had dissolved. They could no longer speak the same language. What they once bonded over, worry, fear, ambition, the endless problem-solving of the mind, no longer existed in his world. And so they left, not in anger, but in the natural way that a river flows around a stone. The awakened one becomes the stone, unmoved by the current, and the current flows elsewhere. Robert Adams spoke of this with great tenderness. He understood that this is one of the loneliest passages of awakening, because the mind interprets it as rejection, as failure, as evidence that something has gone wrong. But he would gently remind, nothing has gone wrong. You have simply become too real for the unreal to remain comfortable around you. There is a presence now, a stillness. And that stillness does not participate in the frantic dance of the ego. People feel this. They may not be able to name it, but they sense that you are no longer available for the dramas they are still invested in, and so they find others who will play along. This is not a judgment on them. Robert Adams never judged those who left. He understood that everyone is exactly where they need to be. Awakening cannot be forced. It cannot be taught. It can only be recognized when the time is right. And until that time, the soul will seek companions who reflect its current level of consciousness. When you awaken, you stop being that reflection. You become something else. A mirror that shows not the ego, but the vastness beyond it. And most people are not ready to see that vastness. They turn away. Not because they are cowards, but because the timing is not theirs. Robert Adams would say, "Bless them as they go. Thank them for the role they played. And turn your attention back to the silence within. Because that silence is the only companion that never leaves. It is the only relationship that cannot be broken. It is what you are. And in recognizing this, you realize you were never alone to begin with." The loneliness was another story, another character in the dream. And like all characters, it too will fade when you stop believing in it. Robert Adams often spoke of solitude not as isolation, but as wholeness. He would say, "In aloneness you discover you are all one." This is not a play on words. It is a direct pointing to reality. When the crowds disperse, when the familiar faces fade, when the phone stops ringing with invitations to participate in the old ways. Something extraordinary happens. The noise quiets. And in that quiet, you meet yourself for the first time. Not the self you thought you were. Not the collection of memories and preferences and opinions. But the self that has always been here. Watching. Aware. Untouched by the coming and going of all things. Robert Adams lived much of his later life in this sacred solitude, not because he was antisocial, not because he rejected humanity, but because he had discovered something more intimate than any human connection could provide. He had discovered his own being, and in that discovery there was no lack, no longing, no need for external confirmation. This is the gift that arrives when people disappear from your life after awakening. At first it feels like loss. The mind panics. It asks, "What is wrong with me? Why am I being abandoned? Have I become too strange, too different, too detached?" But Robert Adams would gently redirect that inquiry. He would ask, "Who is feeling abandoned? Who is it that believes itself to be alone?" And in that question, the entire structure collapses, because the one who feels abandoned is a thought, a mental construct that believes it exists separately from the whole. But in truth, there is no separation. There never was. The people who leave are not leaving you. They are simply exiting a dream you are no longer dreaming. And what remains when the dream dissolves is not emptiness. It is fullness. Robert Adams described this as the discovery of inner richness, a richness that does not depend on external circumstances, a richness that flows from the simple fact of existence itself. When you rest in this richness, you no longer need others to complete you. You no longer seek validation, entertainment, or distraction from the outside. You become content in your own presence. And this contentment is not passive. It is not the contentment of resignation or defeat. It is the contentment of someone who has found the source, the wellspring, the place from which all love, all connection, all meaning flows. Robert Adams would spend hours in silence, not meditating, not doing anything, simply being. And in that being, he was more connected to all of life than most people are in a crowded room. Because true connection does not happen between bodies or personalities. It happens in consciousness. And consciousness is everywhere. It is the substance of all experience. When you recognize this, you realize you are never alone. You are surrounded by the presence of awareness itself. Every tree, every bird, every breath, every flicker of light and shadow. All of it is the same consciousness expressing itself in infinite forms. And you are that consciousness, not as a belief, not as a philosophy, but as a lived reality. This is what Robert Adams meant when he said, "You are the self, and the self is all there is." When people disappear from your life, they are making space for this recognition to deepen. They are removing the distractions, the comforts, the familiar patterns that kept you from diving fully into your own being. And though the mind may resist this process, something deeper welcomes it. Something knows that this solitude is not punishment. It is initiation into a life of presence, into a life of depth, into a life where you are no longer dependent on the ever-changing world of forms to tell you who you are. Robert Adams walked this path with quiet dignity. He did not advertise his solitude as some spiritual achievement. He did not make it into a teaching or a technique. He simply lived it. And in living it, he demonstrated what is possible when you stop running from yourself, when you stop seeking completion in others, when you stop believing the lie that you are small, separate, and in need of rescue. The truth is, you are already whole, already complete, already home. And when people leave, they are simply clearing the way for you to see this. Robert Adams understood something profound about the nature of relationship after awakening. He knew that when old connections fall away, they do not leave a void. They leave space, sacred space. And into that space, something new enters. Not always immediately, not always in the form you expect, but with a precision that can only be described as grace. The universe has its own intelligence. Consciousness orchestrates itself perfectly, and when you stop vibrating at the frequency of unconsciousness, you begin to attract those who vibrate at the frequency of presence. These new arrivals are different. They do not come to you with agendas. They do not seek to use you to validate their stories or fix their problems. They come because they recognize something in you. A stillness, a clarity, a quality of being that does not need anything from them. And this creates a different kind of relationship. One that Robert Adams called meeting in the self. Not meeting as two separate people trying to bridge a gap, but meeting as two expressions of the same consciousness, recognizing each other without words. These connections are rare. They do not happen often. But when they do, they carry a depth that the old relationships could never reach, because they are not built on shared suffering. They are not built on mutual dependency or emotional contracts. They are built on shared silence, on mutual recognition of what is beyond name and form. Robert Adams had very few close relationships in his later years. But the ones he had were profound. They were marked by a quality of effortless understanding. No need for long explanations. No need for constant communication. Just a quiet knowing that they were walking the same pathless path. And when they met, whether in person or in spirit, there was no smallness, no pretense, only presence. This is what becomes possible when you allow the old to fall away, when you do not cling to relationships that no longer serve truth. When you trust that consciousness knows what it is doing. Robert Adams would say, The right people will find you. Not because you are special, not because you have earned it, but because resonance is a law of nature. Like seeks like, silence calls to silence. And those who are ready to live from a place of presence will naturally gravitate toward others who have made that same shift. But here is the deeper teaching. Even these new connections must be held lightly. Robert Adams never grasped at relationship. He never made anyone responsible for his happiness or his sense of wholeness. He understood that all forms are temporary. All meetings are temporary. And to cling to any relationship, no matter how beautiful, is to return to suffering. The awakened one loves freely, but does not possess, enjoys company, but does not depend on it, connects deeply, but remains rooted in the self that needs nothing. This is the paradox Robert Adams embodied. He was deeply loving, deeply kind, deeply available to those who came to him, but he was never diminished by their absence. He was never waiting for someone to complete him. He was already complete. And from that completeness, he could meet others without agenda, without neediness, without the unconscious demand that they stay or change or become something other than what they were. This kind of love is rare because it asks nothing. It offers everything. And it remains untouched, whether it is returned or not. Robert Adams taught that this is the only true love, the love that does not depend on conditions, the love that flows from being itself, not personal love, not romantic love, not even friendship in the conventional sense, but the love that recognizes all beings as expressions of the one self and meets them there, in that recognition, without judgment, without preference, without the need for anything to be different than it is. When people disappear from your life after awakening, you may feel abandoned, but Robert Adams would remind you, watch what arrives. Watch who finds their way to you when you are no longer broadcasting the frequency of unconsciousness. Watch how the universe rearranges itself around your new vibration. It may be fewer people, it may be longer stretches of solitude, but the quality of connection will be different, deeper, more real, more aligned with truth. And in the end, that is all that matters. Not the quantity of relationships, but the quality of presence you bring to each moment, whether you are alone or in company, whether you are silent or speaking, whether you are surrounded by many or resting in the vastness of your own being. Robert Adams knew this, and he lived it until his final breath, not as a teaching, but as a demonstration of what is possible when you stop resisting what is, when you stop trying to hold on to what is leaving, and when you open your hands to receive what is arriving. Robert Adams would often close his talks with a reminder, a gentle pointing back to what cannot be spoken. He would say, "There is nothing you need to do. You are already that which you seek." And in those words, the entire journey collapses into this moment. When people disappear from your life after awakening, it is not a problem to be solved. It is not a sign that you have failed or veered off course. It is simply what happens when the dream begins to thin, when the characters that populated your story no longer fit the narrative you are no longer writing. Robert Adams never promised that awakening would be easy. He never said you would be surrounded by crowds or celebrated by the world. He only pointed to the truth. And the truth is this: you are not the person you thought you were. You are not the collection of relationships, achievements, failures, or identities. You are the awareness in which all of that appears, and that awareness needs nothing, loses nothing, gains nothing. It simply is. When you rest in that awareness, the comings and goings of people become like clouds passing through an empty sky. beautiful, temporary, and utterly natural. You do not chase the clouds. You do not mourn their passing. You simply remain as the sky, vast, open, unchanging. Robert Adams lived this way, not perfectly. Not as some idealized saint untouched by human experience, but as someone who had seen through the illusion deeply enough that he could no longer be fooled by it. He felt the loneliness. He noticed the departures, but he did not identify with them. He did not make them mean something about his worth or his path. He simply allowed them. And in that allowing, he remained free. This is the invitation he leaves behind. Not to become enlightened, not to achieve some spiritual state, but to recognize what you already are, to stop running from your own presence, to stop seeking validation from a world that is itself a reflection of your own consciousness. When people leave, let them go. Bless them. Thank them for the mirror they provided, and turn your attention inward, to the silence that never leaves, to the presence that never wavers, to the awareness that has been here all along, patiently waiting for you to notice it. Robert Adams would smile at this point. A quiet, knowing smile, not because he had all the answers, but because he knew there were no questions. Only this, only now, only the vast, infinite, inexplicable mystery of being. And in that mystery, there is no loneliness, no separation, no one who can truly arrive or depart, only consciousness, playing all the roles, watching all the scenes, and eventually recognizing itself in the silence between the words. Rest there.